Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So this afternoon, we're going to go through payroll year-end and bureau updates. Just a few changes around what's happening at this time of year with the Sage software. Obviously, we're going to touch on some of the legislation change and so on as well. Now, just a little bit of admin. I'm supported this afternoon by a couple of colleagues, so if you do have any questions, please feel free to pop those into the questions area. You should see the icon for that normally on the right-hand side of your screen. The session will run 40 minutes, 45 minutes, depending on how many questions and so on we get. But let's just make a start. So the agenda for what we're going to cover, we're going to look at program updates, what's coming, when it's coming, and what you're going to need to do on that. Quick recap of some of the legislation changes. Now, I'll say some of the changes because there's a budget coming up very soon. And we're already hearing rumours within Sage that there's actually more legislation change on the way. So we'll give you an update as to what we currently know. But we will obviously caveat that by saying subject to what happens on the 3rd of March when the budget takes place. We're then going to cover some of the new things which are coming. So we're going to cover some of the changes which have already started to appear in the online bureau. We'll look at some of what those changes mean to you guys. Some new functionality then around starters and leavers, around Payroll Bureau Manager and automating payroll and payroll processes, before we then move on to just some support materials, support tools, and so on, which are available for you guys. And then we'll touch on something called the customer advisory groups, and we'll invite you guys to join if you're interested. So let's start by looking at program updates and what schedule Sage has implemented for any changes. Now, a couple of things. We are already on version 27.0. So that was released last week. If anybody has not yet downloaded and installed that, you will either be offered it as an automatic update, or you can log on to Sage's website and manually download that. Now, over the course of the whole of February, we will be offering that out to all accountants, and it will become an automatic update. It may just not quite have reached you yet. Now, if you're interested in pulling that down, then there are some new features and so on in there. It may be worth just installing that, get that up to date. But one thing to bear in mind, there will still be a further update, which will be 27.1, which will happen after the budget. So, a couple of days after usually, depends on how widespread the legislation change is, how quickly we can get that updated, get that tested, and get that out to you. But certainly towards the beginning of March, there will be a further update which you will need to install. That will become a mandatory update. And so at that point, at a certain point in time, you log in, it will make you take that update, and it won't let you continue until you do so. Now, if you have already downloaded version 27, then we're going to move on to some of the new features which come into that as we go. And one of the first things I want to outline is this area of you asked, we listened. So we've been getting a lot of feedback, for example, around Sage's Online Bureau. How could we make it better? How could we make it easier? Well, version 27 allows some of the additional functionality to actually surface within the payroll software. I'll touch on it a bit more later, but there's a migration process to move anybody who you are using online payslips, online documents, and potentially online timesheets for off the old original version of Sage's online portal into the newer updated version. Now, in order for that to be available to you, you must be on version 27, whether it's the 27 that's already out there, came out last week, or whether it's 27.1, which you would install towards the beginning of March. But there are some significant improvements, significant changes, and we'll touch on those as we go through this. Now, in version 27, we've also added in some quick links, some better options for how to actually access certain bits of information, and some support tools. So the Sage QA Live team, for example. Again, I'll show you a screenshot in a moment of where that is in the software. But version 27 also adds in the ability to change the information that was submitted in the prior year. Now, that's been in there called the EYU previously, the earlier year update. But from 6th of April, earlier year update is no longer a valid submission. So as a result, they're not going to accept that from HMRC, So it's been replaced by something in the software called amend a previous tax year. And that has now been updated in version 27. Now, reiterate though, at the bottom there, this isn't the update. So the version of 27 that's out there at the moment, that is not the update for your payroll year end, because as I've already mentioned, there's still new legislation to come and we are waiting on what that looks like. So there will be that 27.1 update, which comes in March. A couple of bits and pieces. Remember that every time you install an update, you must upgrade your companies within your payroll. Now, if you are using Sage 50 Payroll Bureau Manager, you have the ability, remember, to upgrade all of your companies at the same time. So you can select them all down the left and you can select upgrade icon at the top left-hand side there. Now that will then just cycle through all of your companies, bring them all off version 26 up to version 27. And it's a nice quick process. Now, as you can see on the screen there, once you've done that, we're checking this every now and again. Just check that none of the companies do require upgrading. And fingers crossed, you'll get the message that's on the screen there. Now, that is available from the maintenance area of Payroll Bureau Manager and also in the company's overview area of Payroll Bureau Manager. Now, if you're not yet using Payroll Bureau Manager, that is a tool which is free of charge to everyone who has our Bureau software, which it's like a management tool for all of your payrolls in one place. Not the focus of today's session, but if that's something that you're not currently using, you're going to see later why it's going to be important for you. So get in touch with your practice success manager if you're not already using it. They can arrange a session with either myself or one of the other guys on the enablement team, like Alex or Mark, who are supporting me today with the questions. And we can then put some time aside to take you through getting that installed, get that set up, because there are some significant benefits already in the software, but coming soon as well. Now, I mentioned about the web links changes. So if you go into web links within your payroll software, you'll see an option there for QA live sessions. Now, if you've not yet used the QA live sessions, it's a great alternative to basically getting telephone support. So you can click through into it. It runs a session similar to what you're attending today. So similar to a GoToWebinar session, but it runs throughout the day. You can ask questions of the people on there. You can ask information. They can do demos. They can give you information that you may not be aware of. They can point you in the direction sometimes of some of the new features and so on. But what we've done within Sage is we've moved a lot of our more experienced technicians off the telephone lines onto the QA live sessions because they can support more people in that way. So if that's something you've not yet had a look at, definitely get that installed, get version 27, and then click into that QA live sessions and have a look at that. Now, a couple of other bits and pieces. So we're going to break this down into a before, during, and after. So thinking about payroll year end, what do you need to do in advance of actually running the year end? Well, as we've mentioned a few times now, you do need to make sure you install all of your software updates. Okay, there is a further update in March. And make sure that you install that before doing any processing in the new year. Okay, we have had quite a number of people in the past who maybe have forgotten that. They've moved into the new year. They then realized there's issues. The only way back then is to actually roll back or restore a backup, install the update, and then redo it again, because obviously there will be subtle differences in the figures if your update hasn't yet been installed. Then check if you have a week 53 on any payrolls that you're running. Now, just a quick recap, if you're not aware, week 53 is where you've got weekly, fortnightly, or 4-weekly paid people, and the next logical pay date would be Monday, the 5th of April. Now, I say this every time, and we still get people who try to do it. Firstly, it will never apply to monthly, and if you don't logically have a week 53, don't try and create one. We have had some people who have set their date to the 5th of April and tried to generate an extra pay period. There's no point. It's something that you should only do if your logical pay date is Monday, the 5th of April. Then process your final pay period. So you would process, do any final assessments, make sure all of your pensions have been done, make sure you've done everything that you want to, including updating your final pay period for all of your pay frequencies. Now remember as well, if you've got directors NI may well recalculate depending on whether you've got them set as director or director table method. If you do have directors and you look at their final month calculations and you're not sure about it, simple things to check would be things like your date directorship began. Make sure that's set correctly before you process your final pay of the year. Then process any leavers, anybody who's left on or before the 5th of April, for a couple of reasons. One, you obviously need to inform HMRC of that, but also those employees don't get a P60 from you because they've already effectively left your employment if they left before 5th of April. Then do your final submissions of the year, so your full payment submission, and make sure that's on or before the date the employees get paid. Okay, but bear in mind, you've got an EPS potentially that you may need to also do for month 12, and then your final submission of the year is actually part of your tax year-end process. And that submits an additional EPS to HMRC, and it basically just flags the system to say, this is my final pay run and pay submission of the year. Now, I've mentioned this quite a few times, but remember that because of the budget in March, there is a separate legislation update that is going to be issued. Make sure you put that in place, make sure that's installed and all your data is upgraded before you do anything in the new year. Now, the only things you could do prior to actually installing that update would be to prepare your employees' records, your week 1, month 1 flags, and so on. And you can do that through global changes. So you can do it for all employees within one company. But not everybody's aware, you can also do it for multiple companies at the same time through the multi-company tasks facility. You do that in your payroll software by clicking in the company and then multi-company tasks. Now, if you have had any year-end notifications, P6s, P9 notifications, remember to separately apply those other than just doing your standard changes for your L, M, and N codes, which I'm going to move on to in a moment. And then after payroll year end, also remember to apply for any employment allowances. Now it says there to wait for HMRC to confirm eligibility. If it's the same as last year, HMRC never got round to actually sending those confirmations. So I personally, because of what's happening with HMRC and COVID and everybody being incredibly busy with other things, I wouldn't mind betting that those confirmations may well not go out again. So they will confirm if a company is not eligible, but if they are eligible, the assumption is likely to be that you go ahead and you apply it and you process accordingly. Now again, remember that you can also do that multi-company. So I'm going to move on to a couple of screenshots in a moment, but remember you can do those, apply for employment allowance and do that for more than one company at the same time. So we'll move on to that in a second. Remember, small employers relief does get cleared down at the end of every year. So you do need to go back in and reflag that if a client is eligible for small employers relief. And you should ideally do that before you do your first pay run of the year. And you do that just in company settings. It's a little tick box there. If you do process holiday schemes, remember to advance any holiday years if they do coincide with April. And if you do have any 2 or 4 weekly pension schemes with Nest, because Nest doesn't have a tax fortnightly and a tax 4 weekly, you must, as part of your preparing for the new year, go on to Nest, set up new groups within each scheme, make sure that the dates align with the new year's tax dates and tax periods, and then at that point, move any employees into those groups. Now, that's not something Sage can basically get around. If it's tax weekly, tax monthly, it's all automated. It automatically, seamlessly does that. But if they are fortnightly or 4 weekly, remember you do need to manually change that on Nest. Now, just a couple of screenshots here. So I mentioned before, not everybody's aware that you can actually implement quite a lot of the changes multi-company. So if you look on the screen here, you've got company down the left-hand side, and we've selected multi-company tasks. You then get your step 1 and step 2. Step 1 is to select your main area, so in this case, PAYE or national insurance. And then task, the second drop down there, apply tax code change, in this case where code has a suffix, but you also get options in there for things like clear, week 1, month 1 flags. All of the things you would normally do within a single company, a multi-employee, you can also do through here. So in the screenshot there, your L code, your value is going up by 7. And you'll notice there now there's an effective from date. Version 27 has added in date-sensitive tax codes. So you can pop in the dates that these changes should be applicable for. So if you have applied or you do apply any P9s, P6s, it will ask you what date you want to effectively apply them from, and it will queue them up, and it will just take effect from that date. Now, that does allow us to introduce some of the new functionality, which I'm going to move on to later. Now, I mentioned as well about using multi-company tasks to apply for your employment allowance. So similar, you can apply to as many companies as you want to. PAYE national insurance still as your first step 1 task, but your second one then is to apply for employment allowance. You can say whether state aid is applicable, and if it is applicable, you can then say which sector, and 90% of people seem to be industrial on that one, but you would have to group clients together. So if you did have any who were fisheries and aquaculture, you would group them together and apply those. If you had others who were transport, you would go through and select just those companies and then go through this process and batch them off according to what options you're going to be choosing here. When you then choose to submit, it will then just submit that information directly through client by client to HMRC, and it saves you having to do that one by one. So I would definitely recommend go and have a look at what's available in that multi-company tasks area, because there's quite a lot in there, specifically around payroll year end, that will assist you. Right, let's have a quick look at some of the legislation changes that we've heard about so far. But like I say, I'm caveating that by saying there are potentially more changes coming, and Sage is certainly hearing rumors that actually there's probably more than we had anticipated. So watch this space for the budgets on the 3rd of March and what changes come in with that. But talking about tax code changes, the emergency tax code 1257L, so it's just gone up by 7. So the following tax codes are uplifted. Your L is jumping up by 7. Your M codes are going up by 8. And your N codes going up by 6. So obviously apply those as relevant. If you are doing it for all employees within a company, then remember you've got global changes. And remember, we just had a look there. You can do this multi-company if you choose. UK bandwidths and rates, just in general. Your 37,700, and then 150,000 and then excess, and you've got your 20, 40, and 45 for your basic, higher, and additional rates. Already in the software, if you've installed version 27 and you moved into the new year, but like I say, make sure you do install version 27.1 because that's where all of this will be finalized and embedded. National insurance. You can see there quite a number of thresholds in there. You've got your LEL, PT, ST, and so on, all updated accordingly. So your monthlies, for example, going down, you've got your 520 for your lower earnings level. The primary threshold is now 797. Secondary threshold, 737. Your upper earnings limit, 4189, and so on. So it's just got up slightly. It was 50,000. It's gone up to 50,270 over the course of the year. Employee rates, 12%, 13.8%, no changes. Employment allowance for the 2020-2021 year, £4,000. And your apprentice levy allowance has been set at £4,000, and 0.5%. Now, again, all of this embedded in your legislation when you install all of your updates. Statutory sick pay, 96.35 for the new year. And minimum wages going up again from the 1st of April, so not from the 6th of April, but from the 1st of April. So your 23 and older is going up to $8.91. And then obviously just proportionately as it goes down, 21, 22-year-olds, £8.36, 18 to 20-year-olds, $6.56, and your 16 to 17-year-olds, £4.62, with your apprentice rate at £4.30. Now, when you're applying these, if you are not using factored pay elements, remember that you might need to actually implement this change on multiple pay elements. This might be an ideal time to investigate the factored pay elements where you can link everything to one rate. So if your overtime rates change, for example, it will automatically change in line with your minimum wage and so on. You can also make sure that you have flagged all of your employees to be checked against minimum wage. You can do that through global changes if you wish. Now, other significant change which is coming in from April, and that is around the IR35 or off-payroll working rules. Now, it was originally introduced quite a while ago, back in 2000, to make sure that people who were working through a personal service company, a PSC, were classed as employees in one respect with regards to this paying roughly the same tax and national insurance as if they were employed. Now, the IR35 legislation was due to go live April 2020, but it was pushed back because of COVID-19. So it has been confirmed that it is actually starting from this year, 6th of April 2021. Now, it does apply to medium and larger sized organizations, but it doesn't apply to small organizations. So we need to have a look at how we define each of those. So to qualify as a small organization, it's this information here. So fewer than 50 employees, annual turnover of less than 10.2 million, and total balance sheet assets of less than 5.1 million. Okay, so that's for a small unincorporated company, subject to the Companies Act 2006. And it's two of those three criteria. So do make sure that you are applying the legislation correctly. So if you do have companies where IR35 may be applicable, you'll need to make that determination as to whether they count as a small, medium, or larger organization. Now, if you do identify that IR35 needs to apply, then it's actually employee-based. So you go into the employee record and you change their status to deemed employee. What that means is their tax and national insurance will be deducted in the same way as an employee, but it does exclude them from certain other things like employee benefits, statutory sick pay, paternity, maternity, pensions, and holidays. Now, when your process date is on or after the 6th of April, you can then go into the employment type, I'm going to show you this in a second, and set them to deemed. Now, when you then do your next FPS or your first FPS of the year, it will then submit that information through correctly to HMRC as a deemed employee. Now, just one recommendation, if you are creating these employees, to avoid them being picked up in e-banking, we do recommend setting their payment methods to cash. You'll see there on the screenshot, employment type, so it's on the employment tab of the employee record. The employment type, you would change to deemed. Okay, now, like I say, there may well be other legislation that is coming in with regards to payroll. There's certainly potentially some additional Scottish legislation which they're reviewing, and there may well be others for Wales and the different principalities as well. So watch this space. We're giving you everything that we have as it is today. Right, let's have a look at some of the improvements and changes which are coming. So February, March this year. We've already started with some companies and some accountants and practices on this. We're rolling out improvements to Sage's online bureau. Now, this is all because of feedback that we've had from accountants and bookkeepers that actually in some cases there would be better ways of doing certain things. So we take that on board and we have already started to release some of these features. Now, you may or may not be part of an accountancy firm that's already received these. You would have had to have had version 27, and you would have had to have been in the initial list based on your serial number. But it is being rolled out bit by bit so that all accountants will be expected to have received this by the middle to the end of March now. Now, just a few quick little bits around what's changing. So if you look at the current view as opposed to the new view, when you are in the current view, so the way the online bureau, the online portal is now, in order to actually go in and do settings, you've got to drill down into different areas. You've actually got to go into document settings to configure the documents, payslip settings to configure payslips, timesheet settings to configure timesheets, and so on. So what we've actually done is we've incorporated everything into one dashboard now, so that when you log in, you will do all of your settings in one place rather than having to jump around into 3 different areas and all 3 of those areas just looking slightly different. There's now one consistent look and feel. So we've reduced the number of steps involved in setting up and registering a client. We reckon it's about 60% quicker than it was previously. So you now do everything in one screen. You access the main employee list from anywhere in the software, whereas previously you had to go into payslips in order to access the employees. We've consolidated the screens for employers so that you can add and remove services very quickly and easily. And you can manage the employees and the users from a single place. So it is much quicker, much easier. Also, when you log in, although initially some of the changes do look to be purely cosmetic, it's actually to allow us to implement new features and quite significant changes going forward. So traditionally, you would click into the homepage, you would choose whether you are an employer or an employee, but then you would have to go and you would have to choose which service. Are you going into payslips? Are you going into documents, timesheets, or whatever? The new view, you then choose whether you're logging in as an employer, accountant, or bureau, or as an employee, but then you see a different look and feel. The login screen is much easier. You get a simplified menu bar, and then it just takes you straight into the company. We'll look at the dashboard in a second. Now, we have also updated all of our mobile views. So if any of your clients' employees have been using mobile phones, tablets, and so on to actually fill out information, then they're going to see some significant improvements. Every single screen is actually going to be able to populate on the mobile view, whereas at the moment, certain screens couldn't translate. But also, just the look and feel makes it much more modern and much easier and more secure to use. Now, a lot of the settings, a lot of the administration has just been tweaked to actually make it much quicker. And one of the reasons that we've done these changes is to allow us to actually implement new features. And one of the key features that we've added in is the ability for your employers to be able to send you notification of new starters and leavers seamlessly through the portal without having to resort to text messages or emails or bits of paper or telephone calls. It can all be automated. So within the employees area, your employers, if you've invited them to the online portal, and obviously we'd recommend that you do, certainly now more than ever, we'll see the option there for add a new starter. When they click through, they will then be invited to fill out all of the information that's needed. Obviously, we've made a lot of the fields mandatory. So quite a lot of information in there around things like HMRC need, your titles, forename, surname, and so on. But there is also the ability to add in additional fields. So you can add in things like departments, bank details, cost centers, and also you can flag automatically that, yes, they're going to receive payslips and so on in that way. Now, the benefit then is, once they've filled out all of that information, all they do is click submit data. When they confirm that, that is then available to you directly in your payroll without needing to manually create those records. There's a message. So without you needing to manually sort of translate that information. So this will become a standard part of your payroll run once version 27.1 is installed, which is the one that's coming in March, and also once you have been migrated onto this new portal. So bear in mind, it's still a combination of those two things. Now, when you click through into it, if there are any new starters, you would just select the little green hyperlink there, starters to import. It will confirm, and it will allow you to then check the information and click finish. That will then just create that record without you having, at that point, to go in and go through the employee startup wizard or the quick employee screen. Similarly, if an employer is notifying you of a leaver, they'll be able to pop in key details, when are they leaving, and so on. Now, the other change that I want to identify and highlight for you is actually not part of the online bureau. It's part of what I touched on before about Payroll Bureau Manager. So like I say, if anybody is not yet using Payroll Bureau Manager, what I show you next is going to be one of the big reasons why we would definitely recommend you get it up and running now and get this to the point where you're comfortable using it as soon as you can. Because what we're implementing in the next few months is automated payrolls. And it's being done through Payroll Bureau Manager, not through payroll itself. So as an example, I would be able to highlight a selection of companies. I would be able to define a recipe of what steps I want to follow in order to actually process those payrolls. So as an example, it may be that we use processing checks. So there'll be a few things. Check, for example, if anybody's changed age and moved from one band into another for minimum wage. Take a backup and be able to take a separate backup per company to a bespoke folder. So each client would have their own folder. You'll be able to check HMRC's mailbox for all of the companies that you've selected, see if there's any tax code changes. And I mentioned earlier about the date-sensitive tax codes. It's that change which allows us to build this into an automated pay run. So it will find any changes, it will queue those up ready for the relevant date and put those into the payroll software, but it won't apply them until that date ticks around. Now, as part of all of these checks, you will be able to dictate what you want the software to do. So, for example, with HMRC's mailbox, it may be that you say, well, actually, if anything's found, I want you to pause at that point so that I can check it. Well, that's fine. You can do. Alternatively, you might find that actually we're comfortable with the system. We know that Sage is applying all of these tax code changes, NI changes, and so on correctly. We just want it to automatically go ahead and move on. So you'll have control over what you want to do at each of these stages should something come up. It will be set up so that you'll be able to do pensions through here as well. So if you've got any static payrolls that never change, they're always the same, you'll be able to actually do auto-enrollment and pensions through here as well. You'll be able to create pay slips and decide whether you want to actually save those, for example, as a PDF, or upload those directly onto Sage's online portal and automatically publish them on whatever date you specify. You'll be able to update records. You'll be able to then upload a batch of reports and publish those reports to your clients automatically. Obviously, going off the screen, you'd have the ability to do all of your FPSs automatically, EPSs, but in general, you'll be able to automate your payroll runs for what I'm terming static payrolls, ones that are not going to implement any value changes period by period. So, don't know if everybody knows, but I run quite a batch of payrolls myself. I've got about 86, 87 clients. 2/3 of my clients never change. They are exactly the same period by period. So I will be able to automate 2/3 of my payrolls so that on a period by period basis, I go in, I highlight them all, I click process. Now I've already worked out that's going to save me around about 70% of my payroll processing time. So it could be a significant time saver for the majority of bureaus. Now these changes are going to start to appear in May. So we do need to make sure after we get through payroll year end, we're getting to the point where everything is at a nice steady state, and then we're going to start implementing these changes for you. So if you're not already using Payroll Bureau Manager, I would absolutely recommend that you should get that installed, get that up and running now rather than later, because once you've got that, you'll be able to then just highlight a range of companies, click on to process automated pay run, and it will then just cycle through step by step, moving into each one and then completing the steps. You'll be able to dictate what you want to do at certain points. So if it does find a problem, what do you want it to do? Do you want it to pause at that point, or do you want it to skip that company and move on? You'll be able to dictate what you want to do. So I can't recommend enough. If you're not already using Payroll Bureau Manager, I would recommend getting that installed, get it up and running, even for now, because there's a lot of functionality there. But this is coming very soon after payroll year end. Right, onto the home straight. So last couple of slides here, we're going to go through some of the support and tools available to you as part of payroll year end. Now, if you're not already using it, there is a Sage Accountant and Bookkeeper Hub. You can access it through sage.co.uk/accountant hub. It does have lots of information in there, information around, for example, webinars, but lots of tools as well around automating your practice. And this is also where we keep updated information around what Sage is doing around, coronavirus and so on. You've also got access to Sage's Help Center, and this used to be called Ask Sage, but this is a more advanced version. So it's got more information, more up to date, and it's more responsive. So we can get answers to a lot of your questions more quickly. You can click into I'm an accountant or bookkeeper in there, and it will start to show you some information specifically for accountants and bookkeepers, as well as general information. You've also got access to this Sage QA Live service. Now, the QA Live service is a way of you asking questions of people without having to pick up the telephone. So what we've done is we've moved a lot of our very experienced technicians onto this Sage QA Live. And it's a glorified chat system. You can ask questions, they can give you answers. If there's something they need to show you, they can do. They can send you links to certain things. But it is a very, very good way of you getting quick answers to any questions that you may have. Now, we've had this up and running for a couple of years now, and the feedback has been excellent. In general, the majority of accountants, the majority of bookkeepers, rather than picking up the phone, are now using the Sage Q&A service. Now, last couple of things I'm going to point out. We do run a whole series of Sage University Live courses. And one of the ones that we do run and we get incredible feedback about is the Sage 50 Cloud Payroll Bureau Efficiencies. Now, we've been running this course for quite some time. Obviously, we used to do it face-to-face, but we've moved it into a virtual classroom environment now. If you've not yet attended, it does go through quite a lot of tips, a lot of efficiencies, which can be incredibly useful in order to streamline how you get the best out of payroll. Now, there are links on the Sage website in order to sign up for those. Your practice success managers can also get you signed up for those as well. But there's information in this slide deck, obviously, and I've put a copy of this into the handout section for you if you do wish to download it. Now, just some of the key stats on this. The NPS scores, and that's the propensity for people to basically recommend this, is 81, which is above world class. It does have accreditation tests in there. It is fully CPD accredited as well with all of the major bodies. And if you look at the courses that we run, it's not just on payroll. We actually do ones on the different bookkeeping softwares we've got as well, on auto entry, and it has been very, very well received. Now, it says there 8 expert trainers with over 100 years combined experience of Sage. I think a lot of that is me, unfortunately. But we are very experienced as a team. And as a result, we do run a lot of those courses. Now, last couple of slides before we'll pause and we'll take any questions. There is a questions area if you do want to actually pop any questions in there. So HMRC and Sage aren't supplying P60 stationery this year. How do I print them? Well, version 27.01, and that's the version that is going to come out in March, will include a P60 layout that will print on plain paper. It's got all of the boxes and layouts and everything inbuilt. So if you use the online payslips portal, you can upload P60s as an alternative. We do recommend that. And then that would mean you don't actually have to issue a printed copy, because it's a great way of actually just providing an electronic copy for people instead. Now, in there, why can't I select dates beyond October 31st, 2020 in the JOS module? If you do install the latest version, you will be able to actually progress past that date. So do make sure you install all of Sage's software updates as they come out, because that does resolve that issue. We've actually had quite a few calls on that. So do make sure you're installing Sage's updates as they are released. So if new tax codes for the new tax year arrive in the mailbox, when can I apply them? Now, if your version is 26.02 or above, you can apply them immediately, because it does have date-sensitive tax codes in there. If you are still on a slightly older version, get your software upgraded, get all the updates installed, and that will then allow you to apply them straight away without having to wait. Is version 27 available? 27.0 is. That was released on the 1st of February. Now, it is being rolled out in stages. So some people may already have that, others may not as yet. But if you're not in the first wave, you can still log on. You can download that by going onto Sage's website. Now, as I've mentioned, there will be a further update, which everybody will need to take, which will be the finalized version of legislation for the new year. And that's simply because the budget figures and so on and the changes are not being released until early in March. Okay, last couple of slides. Customer advisory groups and your chance to shape our software. So we do run a number of customer advisory groups where you can become involved. You can have advanced sight of what we're doing. You can also shape what's happening as well. So we mentioned before around the changes which are happening in your Bureau Manager. You can actually download and get early access to some of the screens, and you can influence what that will look like. So the changes that we put in there around automated payrolls, for example, that has come about because of feedback from people like yourself who are on those customer advisory groups. So if you're interested in joining any of those, drop an email through to Catherine. So it's catherine.eaton@sage.com. She will then be able to invite you, and then you can get early access to certain things, but you can also influence the shape of what our products and so on look like. So if you're interested in that, please get in touch with Catherine. If anybody does subsequently have any particular questions, feel free to contact your practice success manager. They'll either be able to answer the question themselves, or they will direct it to myself or one of my colleagues who can. But at that point, I will end this session, and thank you all for attending.